Hello and welcome. Welcome to today's GMAT YouTube Live. I am Susan Berishai, founder of C Admissions, and I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about the round one application deadlines. I know you who are joining us live and who will be watching this as a replay are on your final month of preparation, and this is a good point to stop and think about how you're going to maximize this 1 month left to get started. But before we dive in, I would love to hear, I'm looking at my other screen over here, I would love to know where you are joining from. So write in the comments where you're joining our live from. And I'm in the East Coast. We have a beautiful day, but it's very warm. I would love to hear where you're connecting from. So, as you join and as you are sharing your locations, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So who am I? I am the founder of C Admissions. I have been a coach for over 8 years now. I primarily focus on coaching applicants through the storytelling perspective of their applications. So crafting the goals, your essays, your resume, coaching on the letters of recommendation, interview preparation, and the whole gamut of the MBA journey, excluding of course, test prep. And I come, so my academic background is I'm an alumnus of NYU and Yale, and I have worked previously at a hedge fund and private equity. I've had, many journeys as I was trying to figure out what I love, and I'm so glad that I found what I love in helping applicants go through this journey and go through this process, and honestly just learning about people's experiences. I have a 94% placement rate, which means 94% of my clients gain admission to at least one of their target institutions. And I'm excited to do this professionally full time and be here to talk with you about how you maximize this next 30 days to prepare. So I see people are joining us from Phoenix, Arizona. Hello. Hi from India, UK. Wow, I love this. People from all over the world. Excellent. So why don't we get started? Let's talk about what I'm going to be covering today. So we're going to talk about a few kind of an ability to step away and self-assess, and then also plan. It's not just about self-assessment. It's not about just grinding either. It's kind of managing the two. We're going to go into the strengthening your core, securing strong letters of recommendation, final touches in submission, and additional tips. And then we're going to go into Q&A. I would love for you to write questions as I go through this process in the comments. So this way I can stop where I am and answer those questions, so it becomes a much more engaging discussion and we don't have to wait until the end. But those are the components that I'm looking to cover, and I would love to hear your questions along the journey of this presentation. Of course, the presentation helps us anchor, and we're going to start with the self-assessment and planning. So a few things that you should be doing at this point. This is not about someone who hasn't done any work up until now, right, in the application. It's not about, putting together a final application that looks somewhat okay. This is really about those who have taken the process serious, have been working through their applications, and are in their final stretch. At this point, you should be looking at, evaluating where you are and what needs to be done to elevate your application. So self-assessment is the first starting point, and in doing that, you're going to read your application materials. I would do one school at a time, especially as most applicants are going to be applying to more than one school. So one school at a time. Review the application materials. This means your resume, your essays. This means the short answer questions, everything that you've been working on up until this point, reviewing it, and then identify what have you done well. It's important to acknowledge that component, and then look at what are some of the weaknesses that you have identified where you feel like you haven't really captured those pieces of the application, or you haven't captured those pieces of what you bring to the table that you need to strengthen. That's the first step before you do anything, is just making the identification. And it's really important to not try to go from, I see a problem here, I'm going to fix the problem. Because what you're doing is you're just creating a lot of stress, but rather take one thing at a time, because it will allow you to really think from a bird's eye view, or look at your application from a bird's eye view, and then plan out the what are you going to be doing in the next 4 weeks, essentially, before submissions are due, before applications for round 1 are due. Once you have identified the strengths and weaknesses, we're going to then focus obviously on the weaknesses in terms of improving and strengthen your application. And to do that, you should be planning weekly priorities for the next 30 days. It's important that you do one thing at a time, or you prioritize your 1 week at a time, and then reassess every Sunday to make sure, have you accomplished what you set out to accomplish in the week that just passed, and how are you going to be tackling the next week, right? One of the things that in the past 8 years I've been doing this, that I consistently see, is applicants think they can accomplish more than they can. And I think this is just human nature. So it's we all do this. This is all of our tendencies. We think we can accomplish more than we can in a given period of time. To avoid this, make sure that you block a lot more time than you think you will need, because you will use all of that and probably a little bit more before you get to the final result. So keep these components in mind. I see that there's a question that showed up in the chat, so let me just read that quickly. Are the schools looking for different things in an applicant? For example, Booth may value student profile, but HBS may not value the same student's profile. What makes a profile to Booth unique? So this is more school-specific components. The schools are looking for different things. Just generally speaking, Booth is going to be looking, obviously, at someone who is quantitatively strong, who has had a lot of impact, and who also cares about growth, not only personally but also of those around him or her. HBS looks for something entirely different, the different characteristics that they're looking for, and we can definitely discuss this a little bit further there. But at this point, when you're doing the self-assessment and planning, you are assessing, what does Booth look for? Have you demonstrated that in your application? What does HBS look for? Have you demonstrated that in application? And HBS has their evaluation criteria right there posted on their website. So go through each one of those and make sure that you have demonstrated those throughout your application. And it's really important, this component, because you don't want to try to say, oh, I know that this school looks for this particular piece, and I can show this on my resume, and it's only going to be in my resume and nowhere else. That's why the application is holistic. They're looking for a character that shows themselves in the entire application, and not just in one particular area. So definitely first look, if you haven't identified what those criteria are, have those written down, and then look at the application one at a time and identify the strengths and weaknesses before you plan the next 30 days. Okay, so let's continue. The strengthening the core is the next part that you need to do. And these are essentially the first thing you're going to be looking at is enhancing your resume. That's oftentimes, obviously I don't know exactly how the structure looks like on the inside, but oftentimes when committee members look at an applicant, they may start with the resume as the starting point. It gives them a bird's eye view, a macro level perspective of who they are, what their accomplishments have been, what their leadership and teamwork, and all sorts of different characteristics that they bring to the table. That's the starting point before they read the rest. And they will read the rest of the application too. So it's not just focusing on the resume, right? But in terms of your resume, it does take quite a bit of time to put together, and recognizing that you have many different jobs that you have to speak about. It's not just like in an essay, for example, where you include only one story. your resume captures many stories in your professional and extracurricular experiences. So does your resume showcase quantifiable results in one component, right? So you must showcase quantifiable quantifiable results, excuse me. And another component is particularly for those very STEM background engineers who are watching and who are playing this. Does your resume showcase qualitative results as well, qualitative experiences in terms of how you engage with others, the leadership, your teamwork, your problem solving? Obviously, everyone needs to capture these, but oftentimes I see an engineering background or quantitatively heavy background applicants focus a lot more on the numeric value and not so much on their contributions and their engagement. So this is a great time to step back, think about who is, if you are someone that's not you and you read your resume, what is the intent, what is the interpretation that someone would have in terms of your application? Don't fill in gaps that just recognize that the person reading your resume is only going to see your resume for the first time, and they may not necessarily get to see a lot of the filling of the gaps that you have, obviously, as a person who has experienced those. The other component in strengthening the core components of the application is your essay and making sure that your essay is refined. So all the schools, whether it's a short response or a long response, or in terms of the space you have, they will all ask about your goals essay. And goals is such an important component of the application that it's now really a great time to sit, reflect, and make sure that you have captured what you have intended to capture. That is making sure that your goals show a compelling story as to what you want to do and how your experiences have influenced those goals. And then why is an MBA an important next step in your career progression to make sure that you are getting to your long-term goal that you intend for yourself? Even in situations where the school only asks, or the prompt only asks for your short-term goal, it's strongly advised that you also include your long-term goal, because your short-term goal is supporting your long-term aims, your long-term goals. So give them a sense of where you're looking to go and how the short-term goal fits there. So that means you have to make sure that your response that you have already captured must contain those pieces. Are you sounding like you're not entirely sure? And in that case, you absolutely must strengthen that and be more specific. You should be also asking multiple people for feedback, not just to read your essay. You want to ask them with specific details of what you want to get out of those individuals, right? If someone says, "What do you think of this?" Okay, it looks great. I like it. Okay, I'm going to give you more macro level feedback. But if you say, "Does it capture this A, B, and C?" then that person can be critically reading for those pieces and saying what their interpretation is of what you have written, and then obviously you can then identify where the gaps are in your essay writing. Okay, so so I see a question here. What is a good way to justify a working gap 1 year? I don't think you need to justify anything. You just need to explain what happened and tell them what you were doing in the 1 year that you had an employment gap. And that is, of course, also part of the strengthening of your essays. You should not be justifying anything in your application. It's an explanation of facts. Justifications essentially can come across as not the kind of person that most of the M7s and top 20 business schools look for. So just bear that in mind. Okay. The next component that you should be evaluating in the next 30 days is making sure that your letters of recommendation that are an important component of your submission are ready and submitted on time. So the letters of recommendation essentially serve as an outsider's voice into your character that the admission team doesn't get to see beyond, wouldn't get to see otherwise, right? So you're telling your story in your essays. The letters of recommendation either support your story or distract from your story. It's important that the letters of recommendation support your story, right? So you want to make sure that you are speaking with your recommenders in terms of your achievement, in terms of your goals, so that they can really capture what you want to communicate to the schools. Sorry, just my Slack keeps pinging and I'm just gonna exit out of that. Okay. So speak with them in terms of the discussing your achievements and your goals so that they can weave those components into the letters of recommendation. Also, make sure that they have enough material that they need in order to write those strong letters of recommendation. You should be communicating with them weekly, if not more frequently, especially if they haven't done any components in writing and crafting your letter of recommendation. Make sure that you are walking the journey with them so that they submit the letters that you would want of them to support your applications. And finally, on the letters of recommendation component, set a reminder in your calendar that about 2 weeks before the submission deadline of your target institution, that you reach out to your recommender and make sure that they're submitting. Your application is not considered complete until the letters of recommendation are received. You also should not be reaching out to your recommenders the day before the applications are due to ask where they are. If they haven't done anything in terms of writing, that letter of recommendation, even if it's submitted on time, will not be very strong. So 2 weeks in advance, you must be following up in terms of finalizing and submitting those letters of recommendation. And you don't want the last minute disasters. So I strongly encourage you to mark your calendars for this. Depending on the schools that you're applying to, there are some schools that do have video essays associated, and you should be planning for those as well. The schools that I'm thinking about are MIT, Yale SOM, Kellogg, Berkeley. They have video components associated for this, and you need to plan out your mock preparation. You shouldn't be doing those at this point per se, especially if you're still working on your application writing, but you do need to plan in advance in terms of mock sessions that you should be having, in terms of recognizing what the questions are, and most importantly, practicing a 1-minute response. Unless you're a social media influencer and knows how to do this, and I will say that even social media influencers don't do this in one take, neither do they do this in one video. They're cutting and all sorts of different things, right? To be able to effectively answer a question in 1 minute requires practice and knowing how much of a response can you contain in a 1-minute response, right? You can't be too detailed because the time is ticking, but you do need to give them some insight so that they can actually get a sense of what you are preparing, what you are saying essentially in response to the question. So practice your responses for 1-minute deliveries as well, right? All right, I see some questions come in. Let me stop here for a moment. How do you address multiple jobs? Okay, so that one, I would say, you would explain why would you leave from one job to another? What were the opportunities that you couldn't leave? This depends on how frequently the job changes are. Sometimes those can be a little bit more tricky to respond to, but typically you are saying essentially, with every job change, what opportunities were you looking in terms of development? How many bullet points per role would be optimal in the work experience? I'm assuming this is a resume question. So this depends. I would say typically the way I guide applicants to go through this, it's about 2 to 3 bullets maximum, but those 2 to 3 bullets are there very purposefully in terms of what they're capturing, the accomplishments, the engagements, the outcomes, and all sorts of different things. But this depends on like the number of work experience, the number of jobs you've held, the companies you worked at, and all sorts of different nuances there. Okay, so there's another question. It says, I just graduated at 20 years old. Is work experience really for an MBA program? Yes, minimum is 2 years of work experience that's required. I'm assuming you graduated this past fall, so you wouldn't necessarily be eligible for the deferred program. But yes, work experience is required. I mean, you can use this 2 years to make sure that you get to the work experience you need to then apply, in 2 years' time. And you do need to demonstrate that essentially you are ready for an MBA. So you do need to have, some kind of progress in the time that professional progress before you can be offered admission. Okay, questions are coming in. I love this. I have been promoted multiple times. Should I show each designation and major accomplishments, or just show the latest designation and club, all the achievements together? Okay. So this depends on how much your entire application or your entire resume shows in terms of your experiences. I do have resume-specific development video essays on C Admissions YouTube channel, so you can definitely go and watch more on that later. But typically, if you have more than one job that you want to demonstrate, you can lump essentially one job or the latest job per company, and then just demonstrate in the job description that you were promoted multiple times per that job. Okay. Is someone graduating from business school at 29 or 30 years old too old? No. Average age per entry is 28 years old. They're graduating by the time that they're 30 from their MBA. So that's the average. You obviously, you can start earlier and graduate, earlier as well. You can start a little bit later too. But typically as an applicant, once you pass or every year you pass 30, as the time that you're applying, it becomes a little bit more challenging to secure admission, especially for the traditional pathways. So particularly consulting and IB, investment banking. Okay, for reapplicants, what can I do differently for the M7 schools application? That's a very loaded question. I'm not sure I can answer. Reapplicants that must demonstrate, I don't know what your application would look like. I meant the first time around. But for reapplicants, what you do need to demonstrate is that you have grown since you last applied, and that you are closer and closer to refining your goals and knowing why an MBA is really important to you. Again, it really depends on like what you submitted last time around. Okay, I love all these questions. Keep them coming. So should I take 2 years to give GMAT before it's valid for 5 years? Yeah, the GMAT is valid for 5 years. 2 years was to work for 2 years, right? And for the GMAT, you can take it now and it will still be valid when you apply in 2-3 years from now. So yes, that would work. But if you are, it's easier typically if you take the GMAT post undergraduate because you're accustomed to test taking and you are sort of like in that rhythm. Once you are working professionally, it takes you a little bit longer to get back into the swing of things. How to best explain higher work experience for 2-year MBA for an applicant? So with 9 years of experience, yeah, so you're going to demonstrate that you are bringing a lot of value to the table. However, don't overemphasize a lot of that value because they will then think that you should be an executive MBA applicant and not a full-time MBA applicant. So you need to strike the balance between bringing value, but also needing the support from a two-year full MBA. What sort of questions are usually asked from a recommender, you mean, by business school? Yeah, so every school will be sending a different letter every school will be sending a link to the recommender you include in the application portal with their own specific questions. Most schools follow the GMAT common letter recommendation question, and those are two main questions. There are some sub questions as well, but the two main questions are: how does the candidate compare to other well-qualified individuals? And give us or tell us the time you gave constructive feedback to the applicant, what were their response, and what was the outcome. Those are the two main questions. You can find this on GMAC's website. You can find them on my website where I talk about them as well. I had videos on letters of recommendation on my YouTube, cadmissions.com as well. So there's plenty of ways that you can find the specific questions that can be helpful in terms of guiding the recommenders in their writing of the letter recommendation. And just make sure that they're providing specific examples that illustrate your contributions and not, Susan is great. That doesn't really say much because greatness means different things to different people, right? Okay, keep the questions coming, and then we'll continue on. Let's see what we have. Yes, before we go into final touches. I want to pivot from Big Four advisory to IB. How best can I communicate my reasons for pivot? Well, what experiences have you had in Big Four that influenced you to move into IB? That is really your answer to that question. Why you want to do it, and you also need a long-term plan in terms of what you're looking to achieve long-term, what kind of impact you're looking to have. Remember, I'm talking about top 20 business schools who want individuals who have been or who are impact-driven, impact-minded. You recognize that your role, the jobs that you do, have an impact in the societies it is a part of, it's contributing to. So you recognize that your contributions are going to be to a cause that matters to you, and that in and of itself is going to impact society in the way it trickles down. Can I use my teaching experience in management to apply for the MBA? Not sure. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by teaching experience in management. Do you mean that you only had that experience, or do you have other experiences? Teaching, it's a little bit tricky in terms of the applications because you need to demonstrate why you want to do it in MBA, and you need to have some kind of exposure that helps you give your reasons why you want an MBA. It's not like I just picked a career out of a hat. So I would need a little bit more details on that. For anyone that wants to talk in more detail about their applications, you can definitely have a conversation with me, and we can talk about your applications and then ways that I can support you. So if you go to cadmissions.com, apply to be coached with us is one of the buttons there that you can request a consultation with me, and you can talk further. I'm not sure I can give more details in here because I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. Okay, so in the letters of recommendation, recommenders should have materials to craft strong LORs. Sorry, but what do you mean by materials? Yeah, so materials, I mean by experiences, like materials that you have identified, experiences you've identified that they can speak about in the letters of recommendation. So how do you compare to other well-qualified individuals? Well, part of that should be some kind of strengths that they're talking about. And those strengths need to be evidenced by experiences in their supervising you in the work that you've done. And so the material you share with them is some kind of guidance for them to tell them, okay, these are some experiences that you may be considering to include in the letters of recommendation. Okay, who can be a recommender, or how to select recommenders for application process? A recommender should be someone who have supervised you. So as I just mentioned, the person who writes a letter of recommendation will need to provide specific evidence in terms of whatever it is they say about you. So if they say that you are amazing at bringing people together, well, they need an example that illustrates how you are amazing and what did you do to bring people together, that there's some kind of outcome. So oftentimes applicants ask if the person can be someone who is like the CEO of the company, because the title matters. Title matters, but it doesn't at the same time, because if you've only met the CEO in board meetings or in meetings, period, then that's not going to be the kind of person that can illustrate your contributions, can give specific examples. Or maybe the person has never given you feedback. That this letter recommendation does require a feedback example, so you need to choose someone who has given you feedback in terms of your improvement. So it must be a supervisor of some kind, and maybe that supervisor is not like your official supervisor. It's someone who supervised you on a project, so that's okay. It can't be a peer. It cannot be someone below you. It can be a client if you are an entrepreneur, something along those lines. So it can be someone who has witnessed you in action, essentially, who can write letters of recommendation. Okay, so let's continue now. Write your questions in the comments so I can answer them as we progress. So here, the final touches in the application. We are about the final stretch at this point. You should be, before you submit every single application, make sure that you are also planning to complete the short answer responses early in your application for every school. Every school's application portal looks slightly different. There are, of course, components that are similar. So your name, your address, your email address, your parents' names are all going to be the same across the board. Not all the same, but across the board, you're going to answer the same questions. But for some schools, you will have a job description or responsibilities and achievements that has 100 characters, and some places 300 characters or 50 words. So you're going to have to tweak everything based on the school. Some schools also have additional questions that other schools don't ask at all, so you do need the time to actually put this together. Once you have written all of these pieces, then it's time for a final application review. It's important that you try not to do all your application reviews on the same day, because you may miss something across schools. So what I mean by that, make sure that you are, reading your application from a bird's eye view, from the perspective of, what are the things that I set out to do? So if you did the self-reflection I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, it's time to pull that document back out and say, okay, what were my strengths? Are they still visible? What were my weaknesses? Have I minimized them? Right? And then read and make sure that there's no errors, right? Sometimes some applicants, put a date on their resume that doesn't match what they wrote in the application, right? The things need to match across the board. Maybe you missed an extracurricular or an award that you wanted to include and you haven't included it in here. This is a time to reflect and to look at everything that you put together. And then plan to submit at least a day before the application is due. For schools that have midnight submission deadlines, if you experience technical issues, you won't have anyone to reach out to. They won't be responding on the night of the application that's due. At least a day before, you have an entire day for them to respond to you and for you to handle any kind of technical issues that you're experiencing. So it's really important that you plan in advance to make these submissions. And for some schools, you have videos that are associated with it. You need to know, when is the video due? Is it due once you submit the application, but before the deadline? So that means you have to coordinate on those pieces, right? And this way, make sure that you are submitting everything by the deadline so your application is not pushed to the next round. Excellent. And the final tips, just make sure that you are sticking to the schedule that you set out for yourself to do. I always use this analogy because I think it's everyone experiences in some way or another. If you give yourself, an entire week to clean your apartment, it will take you an entire week to clean your apartment. If you give yourself 1 hour to clean your apartment, it will take you 1 hour to clean your apartment. So make sure that you are sticking to the timeline. Give yourself time frames, time slot, block your time, block your calendar for specific pieces of the application and stick to that. The other component that I see often applicants do is they're starting to read what's out there, right? Who are the applicants that have gotten admitted? What did their profile look like? What have they done? What they didn't do? And all that does is create insecurity within you and doubt. And that may lead you to making erroneous decisions in terms of what you submit to the school. Focus on yourself. Focus on what you bring to the table and make sure that you capture those components in your application. And then the final tip is start preparing for your interviews as soon as you submit your application. I'll be talking about this in my YouTube Live this week. So essentially, interviews for some schools come in earlier than for other schools, but most of the schools have interviews around the same time. I've had applicants who've had 3 interviews in a single week. If you leave the preparation to when you get an interview, you may miss out the opportunity to present your best self to the interviewer. So start the preparation as soon as you submit. You have momentum. Keep that momentum going until you are completely done with the interviews, and then obviously you have to wait to see what the final results are. So I'd love to hear more questions. I'm going to stop sharing screens, but if you do want to reach out to have a conversation with me about how we can support you here at C Admissions with your applications, not for round 1, for round 2, definitely reach out at cadmissions.com. It's on the screen as well. So let me stop sharing screens and move this to my screen over here so I can look at the camera while I read. Okay, so let me see what I missed. Okay, so is this should be material? Okay, so how can I answered that one. Okay, so how for how long LOR is valid? Because if I wait, yeah, so your LOR should be written in the application year that you're applying to. So you shouldn't be thinking about your LORs, letters of recommendation, at this point if you're applying in 2 years' time. You should be focusing on developing your profile. So looking at areas of weaknesses in your profile and building a plan as to what do you want to do for your goals, and then how are you gonna use this 2 years to make sure that you are building a strong candidacy so you have success, once you start the program in 3 years time, essentially. And then you can start preparing for the GMAT or the GRE, whichever one comes easier, so that you can then, the year before you submit, you can start developing your letters of recommendation and the resume and all the sorts of additional materials that you'll be working through for submission at the time with those application deadlines for those schools that you end up targeting. Okay, so what is the upper age limit if our post-MBA goal is to secure a job to a nonprofit organization? For nonprofits, you should be okay. I would say in mid-30s, I would say that would be the upper age limit in terms of making those transitions. I mean, you just have to remember that the further away from undergraduate you are, so closer to 10 years of work experience, typically the more you have progressed in your career. And the question always becomes, should you be thinking about an executive MBA where your peers are people who have been who are in the same shoes that you are in, or a full-time MBA where your peers are some who have less years of work experience, where you may have already outgrown them, right? So those are considerations to definitely keep in mind for that. It's not a hard rule, by the way, because there are some schools where full-time applicants were admitted at 45 years old. So it's a little bit fluid, but there's always obviously more complications when you get older for a full-time program. So how much harder is it to get into an MBA in round 2 of application compared to round 1? It's relatively equal in terms of difficulty of getting in. However, I will say that round 1 applicants the pool of applicants is smaller than in round 2. But in terms of the people that are admitted, it's relatively equal amounts of people that are admitted. I will say that you should apply when your application is ready. It's no point in rushing an application and submitting it when it doesn't capture your best self. All you're doing is wasting your time, wasting your money, and getting heartache in the process, because the rejection, no matter how impersonal they say it is, it's personal. You've put in your heart and soul into your application. So focus on submitting the application that speaks to your greatest strengths. Okay, can the LOR be generic, or does it also need to be college specific? Managers might not have patience to write so many LORs if it's college specific. Actually, yes. The examples, the managers, your supervisors are going to should be writing your best examples, right? Irrespective of which school that they're applying to. Now, every school has their own nuanced questions, therefore they will have to tweak those main stories that they're sharing to answer the questions of each school. And for that reason, this process starts early because there's a lot of work on the recommenders in terms of their commitment to supporting you. So you do want to give them some kind of idea of what examples they should be including, and then recognizing that they will have to answer the questions slightly differently per school that they're applying to. And some schools have more questions than the GMAT common letter recommendation. So like NYU asked the IQ questions, Kellogg asked the diversity and inclusion question. Wharton asks entirely different questions. So you do want to make sure that the recommenders know exactly what the questions are and be able to speak to those. Okay. GMAT and GRE, which one do you recommend for the MBA application? I think this will be engraved in my stone, in my stone when I die. Take the test that shows your best candidacy. It does not matter. Schools do not care which test you take. There are applicants who are really much more comfortable with the GMAT. Others are much more comfortable with the GRE. At the end of the day, schools are agnostic about, I think the last time I checked, it was like 40% of the applicants get admitted with the GRE. And with these test changes and the GMAT focus, a lot of the schools are now also asking for the writing assessment. It's complicated. So focus on what you can demonstrate your best, which test can demonstrate your strongest score, so that you can be done with it and focus on your application and presenting your best candidacy. Excellent. The last question is here. So if you have additional questions, please write them down before we end this session. Okay, so can my recommender submit the same LOR which was used for my last application? I would not recommend that. I always say if something didn't work out, don't try to use the same thing. You need to change. You need to tweak things. Now, there's a caveat to that because some recommenders may not have new experiences. What I mean by that is maybe this is a recommender that you've used, that you worked, someone that you worked with in your past job, therefore they don't have new experiences. But even so, those need to be tweaked a little bit in terms of, demonstrating a stronger letter recommendation. But if there's someone that you're working with currently, then that letter of recommendation needs to be revised, because you do need to demonstrate growth, and the recommender needs to support that as well in the letters of recommendation. Amazing. Okay, so perfect. Well, thank you guys for the wonderful questions. I really enjoyed answering your questions along the way. Wait, I don't think you're letting me go yet. Let's see what questions I have. Okay, so if we're not accepted in round 1, can we make changes and apply again in round 2 to the same university? No, you can only apply to You can only apply once per application cycle. So if you choose to apply to Wharton, let's say for round 1, and you're rejected, you cannot apply to Wharton until round 1 of the following year. So for that reason, when I say, put your application in when it's the strongest, is specifically for that. You cannot reapply the same application cycle, and you are potentially losing an entire year if you're really committed to that one particular school, which delays your career progress, which delays everything along the lines. If you wait a couple of months and submit a really strong application, that can make a huge difference in the outcome. Okay, perfect. All right, so I think that's the last question. Thank you all for joining me. I'm really glad that I got a chance to share my perspective on these questions, and also help you as you plan and finalize your applications for round 1 submission in essentially about a month, I think, to the day. So thank you again, and go to cadmissions.com if you want to book a call with me. I do also have a YouTube channel where I host weekly live sessions. So it's C Admissions YouTube, and join those as well. Thank you, and I will see you next time.